we have, for this first inaugural event for our Centennial Speaker Series, we have 3 of our student grant recipients who have been selected for support through the Centennial Fund or through other funds that we have available to us. It's been a long 2+ years now with COVID that has made it very difficult for people to get abroad to do international research. But these 3 projects were able to go forward in one capacity or another, either involving travel or working around the difficulties inherent in travel to still accomplish the research objectives. And so our 3 student panelists will have each of them present on the projects that they've been able to complete. And then we're going to reserve some time for Q&A and discussion at the end, if that's all right with you. So without further ado, let me invite up, I'll briefly introduce all 3, but then we'll invite them up in turn. So Adlynn Jamaludin has just graduated from a master's program in communication and journalism and is awaiting gainful employment and is still here with us in the Laramie community to talk about a research project that she has conducted on K-pop in Korean cultural music scene and the COVID-19 environment, the impacts on that, and how there have been accommodations to still connect with the fan base and how that's evolving, the connection between artists and their fans. Then that will be followed by Jordan van Eggers, who is a PhD student in geology and geophysics, but whose research is specifically on sedimentary DNA, so ancient DNA in sedimentary layers, who conducted research in Sweden and is going to be talking about that field experience, but also how it fits into the larger context of her research on ancient DNA. And then we have Mina Moscatelli also, who has also just completed a master's program in international studies. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that was the area for her first master's. She's about to jump into her second master's in Spanish. And she'll be talking to us a little bit about her research on smallholders and in coastal Ecuador, in a particular part of Ecuador, and their relationship with bamboo and the natural environment and how it is being increasingly looked at as an economic resource and how that may affect the relationship between smallholders and their land and the resource. So I'll invite Adlynn Jamaludin first to talk about your project with K-pop.
Hi everybody, so I'm Adlynn, and my topic is titled K-pop Reimagined for Deep Distance amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And I was supposed to go to Korea for my research with a grant, but at the time Korea was still requiring for us to quarantine ourselves, so that was another $2,000, which I didn't have.
Could you speak a little louder? I'm very deaf.
Okay, yeah. So I was supposed to go to Korea, but at the time Korea was still requiring quarantine. So that was an extra $2,000, which I didn't have. Sorry. Oh. Cool. All right. So the reason why I did this topic was because I have an interest in Korean music culture, and then also because in 2020, despite since COVID, everything else shut down and they didn't know what to do, their album sales actually increased by 40%, and then it increased again by 37% last year. And so I figured that, the uniqueness of the industry and then the uniqueness of the fandom, even prior to the pandemic, and then even more so during the pandemic, and then the global reach that they had, they were popular even before COVID, but during COVID, it was just through the roof. And so I find that very interesting because everything else shut down, but but K-pop became even more popular. So this is why I did it as my research. And so it wasn't a typical research paper. I did a mini documentary on it. And, basically it was just to see how, COVID not only changed the way we live our lives, but also how fans experience music. And then, so it basically explores how K-pop reaches and benefits fans before and even during the pandemic. And especially from a fan's perspective. So it's not from K-pop's perspective or the industry's perspective, it's from fans talking about what K-pop did and how that benefited them as fans. And then, so it was 34 minutes and it was on YouTube, and it actually won the Best Thesis Project Award for the Communication Department. So that was really nice. And then the interview process, I recruited fans all over the world through a website that I created, and then also from a Simply Book website, which was for scheduling stuff, which is a really great platform to use. I had 62 people signed up, but only 32 people were interviewed because of time constraints, and I didn't want to be overlapping with geographic diversity, so I tried to make it as geographically diverse as possible because it's such an international kind of project. And then because of the time zone and all of that, I tried to make it as flexible as possible. So it was 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. And then I had 16-person in-person interview that was conducted at a concert and a fan event that I did out in California. And yeah, so it was really fun talking to these fans, but there are some days where the interviews would go for like 5 hours straight, and it was only on Zoom. And I wanted to throw up. Like, I love talking about K-pop with you guys, but I need some me time, Yeah, so this is the website that I created. It has like my paper on there because I also had to create a paper for my master's. So if you ever want to check it out, it's on there. And so some points in the documentary that I did was we started off by asking, what is K-pop to you? And then what got you into K-pop? And these two questions are sort of like overlapping each other because what got them into K-pop might also be what is K-pop to them, which I received so many interesting answers, but most of them said that K-pop to them is a sense of community and a sense of belonging, which is really nice. And then they also went into talking about K-pop versus other genres, where to them, other genre isn't as, I guess, inclusive compared to K-pop, where because with K-pop, they would always make sure it's like fans are always included in everything that they do. And then it's always a two-way street where they ask fans, like, what do you want to hear from us? What do you want to see from us? And then, so they're also like not only singers so they also kind of like compare and contrast and said that with other musical genre, like per se, Adele, like her last album was 25 and then her next one is 30. So between that 5 years gap, like you don't really have anything else to fall back on instead of just old concert videos or just probably an interview or two with Ellen or something like that. But with K-pop, they not only have to have a minimum of like 2 albums per year, but they also have to constantly be available for the fans. So they're also like, they also do some other things. So they're music show hosts, they're radio DJs, they're ambassadors for many different things. They're models. They also compete in sports. And then they release various content. So it's reality show, variety show, all of that. So it's nonstop. And then fans also said that because of these various contents, they were able to feel like they're not as sad during the pandemic because they always have something to look forward to. And then K-pop always like give them comfort with all these different contents. And then this is an example of the two-way street that I talked about, where this group actually asked fans to vote for the next song that they were going to promote. So they have like 2 songs out and they're like, which song should we do? And then so things like this often happen, which is really cool. And then the big part of the documentary was fan participation, which is also a huge, huge part in K-pop, where, again, like I said, they always include fan in whatever they do. So it's a two-way street, but there's also a fan-to-fan kind of relationship, which is really cool. So the first thing, social justice, is mostly, it's both fan to fan and also fan to artist. They kind of give back to the artist. So with social justice, what they do is usually they would do an act of social justice in the name of K-pop. So for example, last year in Malaysia, we had a major flood, and these K-pop fans came together and raised $15,000 around that in the name of K-pop, just to like give it to, for social justice. And then for billboards, this is something that started back in Korea, but it's kind of all over now. If you go to New York, Times Square, it'll be full with K-pop, and that's because fans would raise money together and put their K-pop faces on there as a way to like show appreciation. And like, sometimes these like billboards would say thank you for whatever, or like happy birthday, just because they show their appreciation for all that they did. And then birthday projects, similar, where fans would raise money and buy gifts for these idols. And they're not only like birthday cakes or like flowers, they would buy like Chanel, Gucci, or all those things. And if an idol actually said that I like this kind of brand, and then they would like just flood it with that kind of brand. So, and then the dance community is more of a fan-to-fan participation or like relationship, where fans would get together and dance together, and kind of just like, be together. And this is also a community for them where they not only share the same interests of dancing together, but they also share the same interests of the same music genre. So that's really fun. And then Club Sleep events is also another fan-to-fan participation. And then someone actually asked me if, this event is where during a birthday or during an anniversary or whatever, they would have an event at a cafe where they print all these goodies to just give out to fans. And then someone asked me if it was supported by the artist or the agency. Like, no, fans would actually just spend like $300 to do all these things just to make sure other fans are happy. Like, I don't have that much money, but thank you for those fans who actually did it. So yeah, those are really fun. It started also back in Korea, but now like it's everywhere. Like if you go to LA, it's just gonna be like filled. If you just go to a random cafe and like you see all these stuffs, now you know why. And so we also talked about physical concerts. And so prior to the pandemic, concerts for K-pop is also a big thing because, like other musical genre, concerts are a huge thing. But with K-pop, it's especially very nice because people would like also give away freebies to just for whatever reason, for fun. And then, so for like this one, like one person, it can be either just one person or like a small group of people who will like print out like all these banners or whatever, just to show appreciation for the people that are performing. So it's sort of like a little surprise because they wouldn't know what's going to happen. So it's sort of like a surprise to them and just like, thank you for performing for us. So here's our gift to you. So for this one, it happened last year during the concert. It was someone's birthday. So they kind of did like his name and just like they sang happy birthday together. And then light sticks are a very unique thing to K-pop where they're not little glow sticks. They're expensive stuff and like they're big. It's very unique to different groups because it kind of like represents the group. And then so these things have Bluetooth capabilities where they can make the whole crowd like sort of the same color. So like for this one, it's like green, and then it can also be sort of like a performance kind of thing where, it can like show wordings or just make it like into a shape kind of thing, which is really nice. And it kind of makes fans also feel involved in the concert where they're also doing some sort of performance, I guess, which is really nice. And then it kind of like makes fans feel like a collective because we're all, holding the same thing, cheering for the same person. And then when COVID happened, obviously everything had to go online. And then so to cater to that, what they did was they actually put fans in little Zoom rooms, like little Zoom thingies, where it kind of like made fans feel like involved and sort of like being there as well. And it's also a two-way street where the artist can see the fans and fans can also see the artist. And then it's also very nice to see like, you can like cheer them silently in the background and then you can spot yourself. And then also these online concerts aren't just concerts where they kind of just like sit in their living room, grab a guitar and just live stream it. They're very huge productions where they actually do it in an actual studio or sometimes an actual stadium where usually would held concerts. And then they would have these AR stuff where, like the photo on the right, they have this huge giant, one of the members couldn't make it. So that's one of the special effects that they did, which was really nice. And then fan sign is also one of the major things in K-pop where fans that's like their one in a lifetime kind of opportunity where they kind of like meet they would meet the artist. And then, so when COVID happened, they have to move it online. And then which actually gave global fans more opportunity because prior to that, when it was physical, it was only in Korea, China, and Japan. So global fans couldn't go. And then so with this one, it's only a FaceTime. So everyone can go and it feels more connected because like you can record it and all that stuff. And then it feels very personal because you can see a different side of these artists. It's like talking to an old friend, which most of the interviews I talked to, that's what they said. Like it feels like talking to an old friend because it's just super chill and just like, hey, what do you have for dinner? All of that stuff. So which is really nice. And then so for the project distribution, we did it on 2 platforms. The first one was MTurk, Amazon Mechanical Turk. And we did this to find out what non-K-pop fans have to say about it. And surprisingly, most of them said that they learned so much and like mostly like they didn't know all these things were happening. And so it was really educational for them. And then social media was basically YouTube, where I had most comments were from fans who said their thanks for doing this project because it's not common to see a project or a documentary talking to fans or about fans and asking what they personally think about it. And then so they were happy to like know that, they're to hear other fans' stories and then to know that the way I did my project is to highlight what K-pop means to them in a more like communication kind of way and not just, I'm a crazy fangirl or whatever. And then so most of them said that, people think that we like K-pop because of these pretty boys dancing or whatever. And then they said, I like that you're portraying the story because, it means so much more than just the faces. It's, the emotional connection that they have. Yeah. So if you want to watch the full video, here it is. I was going to show you the video, but guess not. But if you want, here's the link to it. Thank you.
Okay. We might play a clip at the end if there's time after the Q&A.
Thank you.
Thank you. And keep your questions. We're going to go next to Jordan Van Eggers, our PhD student in geology, and talking to us about your work with sedimentary ancient DNA. Oh, I'm sorry. I've got your
file.
yeah. Thanks.
Let me know if you want me to speak louder.
I think I turned it off.
Hello. Is that better? Okay, so as Sean said, I'm a PhD student. My name is Jordan Van Eggers. I'm a PhD student in the program in ecology, but I'm also housed in the geology department. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can use sedimentary DNA from lakes to study past biodiversity changes and current biodiversity changes. And so some of this work was supported by the Center for Global Studies, and I have my other funding sources down here at the bottom. Am I loud enough? I'm getting can you hear me okay? Okay.
Not very well.
Okay, I'll do louder.
How did we turn up this?
Hello. Is that better? Yeah, I'll try to keep it close to my face too. Okay. So here's a roadmap for this quick talk today. I'm going to talk about some basics of sedimentary DNA. I'm going to talk about my dissertation research, talk about my trip to Sweden, and then I'll just leave you with a few takeaways. Oh, I love your binocular. That's so cool. Okay, so let's get right into it. So what exactly is sedimentary DNA? I realize this picture is very small, so we don't need to talk too much about it, but sedimentary DNA is DNA that's stuck in mud at the bottom of lakes or at the bottom of like oceans. So anything that's kind of the bottom of a water body, and it can record evidence of past changes. So what this is showing here is we've got glaciers receding about 15,000 years ago, a change in vegetation, and we also see we have an increase in these lake sediments. So it tracks these changes through time and preserves records of both terrestrial and animal biodiversity. So a lot of the traditional paleo methods are things like people use pollen to reconstruct past temperatures. People have also looked at like macrofossils to figure out like what past bugs were in the lake. But DNA started coming around about 20 years ago, and it's really expanded to the field to animals that don't leave remains in the sediment. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, here this is just showing a sediment core going back in time and tracking these changes we saw on the landscape. And so maybe you're wondering, how far back can we go? Right. So this paper showed that in marine systems, you can go back to about 1 million years old, which is quite extraordinary. In freshwater ecosystems, you can go back to around 270,000 years old. So that's what that bottom one is. All right. And so here's the very basic sedimentary DNA workflow. First, you go out and collect your cores. That's right here. And then you do some DNA extraction and some processing to make it so that you can sequence it and figure out what's in your samples. Then you do some bioinformatics, data analysis, and then you can stand up here and.
How far down do your cores have to go below the bottom of the lake?
It depends on what machinery you have, and I'll talk a little bit about that.
Oh, okay.
But essentially, it is as far back before you hit like rock.
Oh, okay.
But different, like the ocean's different than like lakes up here.
Sure.
Which I've covered. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about sediment coring first. And so that shows you have a boat on top of the water that's taking the sediment core. So generally that's like really big lakes or the ocean. So this is one of the ways you can do sediment cores. This is an underwater coring system. And then here's the boat where you can take these really big, deep cores. And these are the ones that can go back about 1 million years old. But if you're looking at freshwater ecosystems, you can either do it when there's ice or not ice. So here's where we use, oops. This is, oops, we're not ready for the video yet. Okay, so I'm sorry this is hard to see with the white, but one of the ways you can core, especially if you want to go deeper down in time and get bigger cores, is that you can go out when the lakes are frozen, and that's a really perfect platform for you to be able to drop down your cores and get longer time scales. So this picture is us, on the far left is us skiing up to Bradley Lake in the Grand Teton National Park, if anyone's familiar with that. This is us coring on Jenny Lake, and we went back about 14,000 years ago to when the glaciers were here, and we could tell because you have all this glacial till. And so this is one of those longer sediment cores that we got. And I have a video to show you how physically demanding it is to core. This is Sarah Crum. She's at the University of Utah now. We're going to start there. So we use these big constructed things to be able to push down deeper and deeper into the mud. But I just helped out on this project. But generally, I go out in the summer and I collect cores from alpine lakes that are really far away. And so this is a picture of me and a llama where we're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at the beginning of our week-long trip. I would never show you one of us on the way back out because they're quite dirty. So we use these pack animals to help us carry all of our really heavy equipment out to these really remote lakes. So here's us on the trail. And then if we don't have pack animals, I have used pack family members that come out with big backpacks. My husband will never go with me again on one of those trips. So then once we get to the lake, We blow up our little inflatable raft that you can see on the left-hand side. And then this is the coring device we use. So this is just for shorter sediment cores, and this goes back around 500 years. And so you can't see it very well, but there's a rope here, and we drop that down from our boat. And then when we release the tension, it creates suction right here, and then you can pull up that sediment core. And then once we get back on the shore, here we're using the boat as a rain protector to keep the sediment core dry. And it's essentially like a push pop where you're extruding out your sediments and you're taking off layers and putting them into these bags here. We keep them in order so you can go back in time. Okay, so now we're going to talk just briefly about some of the processing methods. So essentially, when you get your mud samples back on the far left, you don't have to know or read any of these steps, but there's a bunch of steps that make it so that you can have just your DNA isolated at the end, so you can do your other things to make it sequenceable. So that's the first step. And then there's kind of two basic methods that we use to get these DNA fragments onto the sequencer so you can read and know who's there. One of them is called metabarcoding, and this would be like if you're just looking for all the bird species. You'd find this pink primer that would attach to all the fragments of DNA that match to birds, and it would allow you to figure out the difference between birds. You're like, okay, we have a few of these species, a few of these species. So this is really targeted. There's another way called metagenomics or shotgun sequencing that really just samples everything in the sample, from microbes to fish to ungulates, like anything, any DNA that's there, this will get, but it is extremely hard to do, which I'll tell you about because I did this in Sweden, and it's extremely expensive as well. Okay, so that was our crash course into sedimentary DNA. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my dissertation research. So here are the two major themes: aquatic biodiversity consequences of anthropogenic stressors, which I'll explain that in a second, and then ecological processes behind the assembly of microbial communities. So we'll start with this one. So this is a lake, an alpine lake in Kings Canyon in California. And when you see a lake like this, generally you may think, okay, there's probably tons of insects like snakes, there's birds, deer, elk, bears, all those things. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, man, I bet there's really good fishing in that lake. And surprisingly, all these lakes that were alpine or mountain lakes, even the ones all in the snowies, didn't naturally have fish. So starting in the early 1900s, they were stocked for recreational angling purposes. And they can have really big impacts on both the ecosystems inside of the lakes and also outside of the lakes. So to show a representation of that, here's this figure where we have our fishless lakes. So we have like macroinvertebrates are going to be your insects and large zooplankton. So when you have a fishless lake, you have a lot of these larger species that eat all the algae, and then they outcompete some of those smaller zooplankton. So they create these really clear, mountain lakes that we see. And this is like I have a hypothesize, I think there's a difference between the microbes too, and I can explain that in a second. So then when you introduce fish, they eat all the large insects and the large zooplankton because they can catch them in their gill rakers. And so that allows the smaller zooplankton to boom, and they're not as good as eating all the algae. So then we have a lot more murkier lakes when we have fish. And there's a lot less diversity as well. And I've hypothesized that there's different microbes because, especially in the sediments, because the fish have these really potentially novel microbial systems in their body, and they're swimming around and depositing the feces out to the deeper part of the lake. So it really could change some of the microbial communities we see. Okay, over here. So if you're unfamiliar with macroinvertebrates and large zooplankton, like I was when I started my project, don't tell my advisors. Here, I highlighted them here, and I'm going to show a quick video to show you what one of them looks like. We got a little copepod here that got stuck in our core, and this is a core I took in the Wind River Range of Wyoming, towards the southern part of it. So here it is, this little red thing is swimming around, and so generally the fish can see these and they can eat them and they can catch them. So these are really kind of the top dogs in the lake before fish are introduced, which is why we found them in our fishless lake. So I just talked briefly about the impacts of introducing fish into the ecosystems. But there's also nitrogen deposition that can change kind of the algal species from the bottom up. We also have climate that can have a lot of effects as well. So my project is using sediment cores to see how these three different anthropogenic stressors impact the biodiversity of these lakes. And also, amphibians are really reliant on these alpine ecosystems. The birds rely on the insects, the snakes also rely on these lakes as, food sources that are coming out of them. And so these fish do really have a big impact. And so what I did was I sampled in Wyoming, Washington, and California in both fish and fishless lakes to try to capture some of these changes. And I did this across this nitrogen deposition gradient. And so our main question was, how has aquatic biodiversity varied over the past 500 years, especially during the onset of multiple stressors? And so what I did was collect 18 cores from these three states. I'm going to contrast the fish and fishless lakes. I've listed some of the analyses that help me figure out nitrogen deposition and climate. And then I'm going to do some of that DNA metabar coding for some of the zooplankton, insects, and bacteria as well. I forgot to mention, I'm just going to talk about the general ideas of each of these dissertation research projects and the methods, but I won't have time to go into any of the results. And they take a lot of explanation anyways. So another question we had was, what ecological processes are behind some of the microbial communities we see in alpine lakes? You may be wondering, why do we care about microbes that are in the bottom of the lake? Well, they really form the bottom of the food web, and they really perform a lot of these critical ecosystem functions like biogeochemical cycling. They're also the most abundant organisms in all of our lakes. So we looked at two questions. How are microbial communities organized in these sediment cores, and how does that change across space? And also, what ecological processes could be shaping what we're seeing in these sediment cores? And so here's kind of a conceptual diagram where I'm showing that these are different lakes with different environmental characteristics shown with the different colors, the different sediment cores as they're buried, and the arrows are dispersal limitations. So we think that there could be transfer between lakes of these microbial communities. That's kind of a framework that it does definitely need more explanation, but just for our quick talk, some of the questions we were looking to answer. And so I sampled across the state of Wyoming, and I sampled in these four mountain ranges: the Beartooths, the Bighorns, the Winds, and the Snowies. And then here are all our coring locations. And so this is hard to see. The darker the points, the deeper the lakes. So we sampled lakes that were only like half a meter deep to all the way to like 19 meters deep. So we have quite a range of elevations and depths. And so in total, we cored 37 sediment cores, many from the Snowies, actually, most of them, about half. We sampled every 2 centimeters, and then we did DNA metabar coding just for your microbial species. And if you'd like to hear more about that sometime, I can send you a link to a video on a conference I did last week where I did explain all this. Okay, so that's some of my dissertation research. So now I'll talk about my wonderful trip to Sweden that I went in October and November. So this time last year, there was a call for collaboration with these two main researchers. Kevin's a part of Laura's lab, but everyone here and myself are all part of the Sedimentary DNA Scientific Society. And the main two cores or areas, I guess, because there's one core here and then 4 cores here, they were wanting help with doing some of these shotgun sequencing. They tried twice before, they couldn't get anything out, so they put a call out to see if they could have PhD students come out and help for 2 months. And so, if you're not familiar where these are, here's a map of Europe. Here's the Baltic Sea. And the main question was is that it used to be around 10,000 years and back, used to be a freshwater lake, and then it became brackish, so now it's the Baltic Sea. So we're really curious to see how the microbes could change when they have an influx of new microbes. So maybe they evolve, maybe they're replaced. So that was the main question with that set of sediment cores. Welcome. The second set was looking at these Swedish mountain lakes. So these lakes were formed around 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. And so we're really curious about the pioneer microbial communities and how they may have started. So I went to Uppsala, Sweden, in that yellow star that's kind of hard to see. And I was in the Evolutionary Biology Center. Here's a picture of the downtown area. It's quite beautiful. And they had an ancient DNA laboratory that I worked in. So here's some pictures of that. We were in full Tyvek suits with 3 pairs of gloves. It was quite hot in there. And we just did quite a bit of cleaning, was what me doing that in the left, tons of bleach. And then we also had some fun too with our selfies. So we worked for 2 months, and some of the outcomes, I'll start with the positive first. So first, I learned a lot of these shotgun sequencing laboratory methods. So that's this one on the right. I learned how to process this like these massive amounts of data that come back out where you need a supercomputer. So I spent some time working on another project, helping do some of those bioinformatics while I was there. But sadly, we actually weren't able to get any of the genetic material out. So some of the samples the molecular weight was too high, so too long in fragments, and we think that something happened with the extraction where we were losing a lot of those ancient samples in the beginning. So third time was not the charm, but I still had such a great time, and I also learned skills that are directly applicable to what I'm doing here, and made a lot of collaborations as well. So what we did, this is us learning from some of the scientists there, and then this is a conference that we had to try to troubleshoot how we could get some genetic material from the samples. So we had some of the leaders in the field come give us some advice that we then worked on for 2 months, but alas, we couldn't get it to work. But I also presented some of my research at this mini symposium. I attended a bioinformatics workshop, and I am currently collaborating on 2 other projects as outcomes of my time there. Okay, so last, and I realize I'm over on time, I'm so sorry. The main takeaways I have are that like sediments are really useful, and in my opinion, super cool tool to learn about past biodiversity changes. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about sediment research here in Wyoming, and that there's many benefits of international research collaboration. And I just want to thank the Center for Global Studies for helping me support my trip out there. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
And next we'll be hearing about Mina Moscatelli's research in Ecuador. Sorry, let me find the right spot.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. There we go. There we go.
Okay. My name is Mina, and I'm presenting today on bamboo and smallholder livelihoods in the coastal region of Manabí, Ecuador. And this is based on my master's research in international studies. Special thank you, of course, to Center for Global Studies who helped with this research, as well as some other funders. And my research is part of a larger research group, and these are some of my collaborators. So to give some project background, bamboo is a grass that has over 1,000 different species and a ton of different uses. It's used anything to make paper, to large, small-scale construction, to artisanal things like bikes and furniture. Can even be food in some cases. And these pictures, which are slightly hard to see, but these are pictures of the research institute where I stayed while I was in Ecuador. It's a good example of large-scale architecture, as well as some of those artisanal uses. Chairs. And bamboo is being scaled up globally for a lot of different reasons. It is being used as a replacement to timber, which is important with the mass deforestation that we're experiencing around the globe. It also has seismic resistant properties, which is important for places like Ecuador that have earthquakes and things like that. And it is also relatively low cost material. So with that, it can be grown quickly and harvested multiple times. And for those reasons, as well as the fact that it has the potential to provide some additional income for farmers, it's really being advertised as this new socially and environmentally sustainable resource. And the market right now is very well established in Asia as well as parts of Africa. And in more recent years, it's been expanding into Latin America because of a large amount of naturally growing bamboo that's found there. So my research specifically, I focused in Mana B, which is this, you can't see it at all, but this coastal region where all those yellow dots are, because there is a lot of naturally growing wadua bamboo that's found there. And this bamboo is very valuable due to its characteristics of being a strong woody bamboo and used again in that construction piece. And Mana B has the perfect climatic conditions for the growth of bamboo, as well as that access to global trade routes. So important considerations for scaling up bamboo. My participant focus was coastal Ecuadorian smallholders because wadua is largely found on their rural smallholder properties, as well as the fact that they are a historically vulnerable, marginalized, and exploited population, especially when it comes to natural resource extraction. So my research questions, I had 3 research questions. What role and what value does bamboo have in smallholder livelihoods? How is bamboo and its production process understood and practiced by smallholders? And do the local practices surrounding bamboo and its production process support social and environmental sustainability? And why or why not might that be? And then my research was informed by the field of political ecology, which engages with a variety of different disciplines. And under that umbrella of political ecology, my project really highlights the literature of political economy and cultural geography. Political economy focusing on that long history of economic dependency and vulnerability tied to natural resource extraction and the capitalist global economy, especially in Latin America and Ecuador. And then cultural geography provided a framework for exploring smallholders, bamboo, that relationship within the context of Mana B. So my research design, I did an exploratory case study research design, and I was in Mana B from mid-November through mid-December of 2021. And I used qualitative methods to answer my research questions. I conducted a total of 11 semi-structured interviews with a total of 12 official participants, but of course, a ton of unofficial participants as well. And I supplemented these interviews with participant observation and field notes. And it was really important to me to, if I'm working with this population, be able to communicate with them in Spanish. So I did all these interviews in Spanish. Limitations, of course, I had a very small sample size, very specific population, and a very specific location. So hard to generalize and replicate this research. So to jump right into some findings, the role and value of bamboo for smallholders, I found that bamboo is extremely important socioculturally for smallholders. It helps them meet livelihood needs. It's used to build houses and livestock structures and various agricultural tools. And as one of my participants, who I'm calling Victor, which any names I use are pseudonyms, but Victor is a 50-year-old man. He's a farmer, and he said to me, I have bamboo here for anything that I need. So kind of just really encapsulates how important bamboo is within their livelihoods. Bamboo is also closely connected to coastal Ecuadorian history, culture, and identity. It has been used in this area for centuries, and knowledge about bamboo has typically been passed down for generations. And then bamboo houses, or casas de caña, are very characteristic of the rural campesino or farmer identity in the area. Bamboo also has a lot of environmental benefits, especially for the maintenance of water. And this is something that every participant I talked to mentioned. So I will also be mentioning it a few times in my own talk. Economically, bamboo was not exceedingly important for smallholders. Most of them saw it more as a regalo or gift that could be shared with friends and family as needed. Could be argued, however, that bamboo does have that indirect economic benefit because it is this free resource that they're using to build houses and livestock structures and agricultural tools, and those were the things that were providing a lot of income for the participants I talked to. The production practices, first, managing bamboo. What I'm defining as managing is what is done to the plant before it's taken out of the ground. Smallholders typically would clear the spines and branches off the bamboo plant, as well as clean out the undergrowth of the plant. And they did this for a couple of reasons. One was to keep the plant healthy and in good shape once it's harvested. And then something that I found really interesting was that it protected them from deadly snake bites. This is a fleur-de-lance, which in the area they call the echis, and it likes to curl up in the humid undergrowth of the plant. So when left to its own devices, the snakes will sit in there, and once people or livestock come by, it will bite them. And being in these rural areas for medical services, the likelihood of dying is pretty high. Harvesting bamboo, what I mean by this is what's done to the plant to remove it from the ground and what's done after the fact. My participants harvested bamboo only when it was echa or ready, and as needed. Smallholders had different ways of telling if the bamboo is echa, referencing color, age, even sound. One of my participants said that you have to knock on the bamboo plant, and based on the sound that it makes, that's how you know it's ready to be harvested. It was also generally accepted that bamboo should only be harvested con la luna, or with the moon, or during the menguante, which is the ebbing tide, in the early hours of the morning. And this was something that most of my participants mentioned, and is something they had just always known to assure that the plant did not dry out or die or damage the environment. There was some variation on exactly how and where to cut the bamboo and using what tools. In this picture, you can tell the bamboo was cut at an angle using a machete about 2 nodes above the ground. But some of my participants would use an axe or cut it straight or at slightly varying different heights. But despite the differences, all these practices remained relatively similar, and that they were meant to protect the bamboo plant so it could grow for a long time in the future. And again, these managing and harvesting practices were typically learned from family members, usually a father or a grandparent, and learned from a very young age. And then the sale of bamboo. Whether my participants sold the bamboo really varied. Most of them, again, didn't sell it, viewing it more as a gift. Some of them sold it as needed or wanted, especially for a little increase in income. And only one of my participants sold it regularly. And the reason why most of them did not sell it is because the price of the bamboo is very low. It averaged around $1.50 for a 6-meter piece of bamboo. And for most of my participants to make any substantial form of income, that meant they would have to cut down a ton of bamboo, and that would be extremely damaging to the surrounding environment. Sustainability, I'm defining as the ability for humans to achieve adequate and decent livelihoods within a particular socioeconomic context, while also maintaining ecological health and diversity now and into the future. So with this, I found that smallholders' relationship to bamboo, as it is right now, does maintain social and environmental sustainability. Bamboo is a respected resource, and it is really treated as such. And as discussed, it provides that indirect, in some cases direct, economic benefits for smallholders, but it also allows them to achieve that variety of livelihood needs. It also is being used in transformative ways in community projects such as Community gardens. I talked to one participant that told me about a community garden that employed elderly farmers that could make some income and get involved in the community. And these are a few of the pictures that that participant shared with me, but you can see the vegetable and herbs being grown in that inner node, which kind of creates this natural container for the different plants. There were also other community projects that participants mentioned, such as women's groups that were being taught how to use bamboo to make artisanal things like lamps. So that was something that came up. And the small scale use really minimizes environmental damage. It's maintained and harvested in a very calculated way, and it provides a habitat for animals, which a lot of my participants really recognized. Also, again, important for that maintenance of water. And on a whole, these practices really helped protect natural diversity in the larger ecosystem. However, I did find some evidence of less sustainable practices being used, and these were not being used by my participants, but people that they had either known or heard about. One of those was clear cutting. This was typically to clear space for monocrop cultures or pastures, which are both very popular in Ecuador. And usually this was done in the interest of hopefully achieving extra income, but never guaranteed. The other practice was cutting tierna, or tender, not ready bamboo. And this was usually what my participants said was done for a lack of care or a lack of knowledge. And all of these practices, my participants really looked down upon, again, because that maintenance for the environment could not be stressed enough. So with that, it is difficult to say what larger scale or scaled up bamboo production might look like in the specific context. So the significance of my project, I sought out to understand what the reality of bamboo is like on the ground and want to be for smallholders specifically, especially before the coming bamboo boom really does hit. And ultimately, the hope is that the bamboo market and its development does not follow in the footsteps of all the natural resource markets that have happened in Latin America and Ecuador in the past. So just as a brief overview, smallholders have a lot at stake as the bamboo market expands. It plays an essential role in their livelihoods and has for a very long time. And these smallholders have also been subject to that perpetual marginalization and exploitation, especially when it comes to agricultural development and natural resource markets. So it is important to keep them in mind. With that, some opportunities that I did identify were adding local knowledge into what is mostly scientific knowledge at this time, as well as the fact that smallholder voices should be included in policy development and projects. And this is really important because bamboo policy right now in Ecuador is pretty non-existent, and what is existent is very unclear. So it creates a really great opportunity to get smallholders involved as the bamboo market is developing and expanding. And these are some of the only ways that I really foresee any true level of social and environmental sustainability occurring in this context. And that is all. Thank you.